In the vast, desolate stretches of Mars, where no human had ever tread before, an ancient secret waited, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten history. A secret that would challenge the very limits of human understanding. Lieutenant Aidan Hall, a seasoned astronaut, had spent most of his life looking up at the stars, dreaming of a moment like this, an opportunity to step foot on Mars, to uncover what had been buried beneath its surface for eons. But nothing had prepared him or his team for what they would find. The cavern was deep, a yawning maw of darkness, its walls covered in strange markings, symbols that no one could decipher. At the heart of it lay the relic, a pulsating dark mass, an alien symbiote sealed in a cocoon-like chamber. It had been waiting, and now its slumber was over. No one understood the true nature of the discovery. They didn't know that the creature was not just a parasite, but a king, an ancient ruler whose thirst for revenge had only grown with time. They didn't know it had the power to heal and destroy, to control and to kill. They only knew one thing. Aidan Hall was the first to make contact. And by the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. The wind on Mars was unlike anything Aidan had ever felt. It didn't howl or rush, but whispered against the helmet of his suit in a soft, eerie sigh. He squinted at the horizon, the red dust swirling beneath the distant shadow of Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system. The sheer emptiness of it all was both humbling and disorienting. But Aidan wasn't here to admire the view. He was here for something far more important, the discovery of the century. The excavation team had been working for weeks, carefully, digging through the surface in search of the anomaly that had been detected months earlier by the rover sent to explore the northern caverns. When the first signs of structure had appeared beneath the sand, suspiciously too regular to be natural, NASA had green-lit the mission to send Aidan and his crew to investigate. It was supposed to be a routine operation, nothing more than another step in humanity's ongoing journey to explore the stars. Except it hadn't been routine at all. The cavern, once uncovered, looked like something out of an ancient myth, an artificial structure that seemed far too advanced for anything earthbound. Its walls were etched with strange symbols, intricate patterns that shimmered faintly in the dim light of their torches. No one could make sense of them, not yet. Aidan had seen more than his share of alien landscapes in the years of space exploration, but nothing like this. "Captain, you seeing this?" Aidan called over his comms, the words crackling through the static. His voice echoed faintly as he stepped forward into the cavern's mouth. His boots crunched on the dusty floor, the faint metallic scent of ancient air filling his helmet. "Yeah," replied Captain Maria Vasquez, her voice sharp with both excitement and caution. "This is big, real big. But be careful, Aidan. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Aidan gave a tight nod, though he knew Maria couldn't see it. He wasn't worried. He'd spent years training for moments like this. His hand brushed against the cavern wall, following the smooth grooves of the alien etchings. They seemed to hum faintly, like a pulse that thrummed in time with his heartbeat. It wasn't real, he told himself. It couldn't be. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was alive in this place, something that had been waiting for them. His eyes scanned the cavern floor, catching the edge of something out of place. His breath caught in his chest. At first, he thought it was some kind of artifact, a relic of an ancient civilization. But as his flashlight settled on it, he saw that it wasn't a relic at all. It was a cocoon. A dark, glossy and pulsating mass lay half-buried beneath the dust, its shape unnervingly familiar. It looked almost like a living organism, alien yet strangely inviting. "Aidan, are you sure about this?" Maria's voice came through his comms again. There was a tremor of concern now, but Aidan was already moving. His gloved hands reached out, carefully pulling away the dust that had collected over millennia. The mass beneath seemed to respond to his touch, rippling slightly like it was alive. Something's inside, Aidan murmured. He couldn't help the thrill of discovery that coursed through him. This was it. Proof of extraterrestrial life, a moment that would go down in history. But as the last of the dust fell away, he could see the truth. It wasn't just a cocoon. It was a prison for a creature. Before he could take another step, the ground beneath his feet trembled. A deep, resonating growl echoed from the walls, vibrating through his body. The cocoon shuddered violently, and suddenly Aidan felt it, a shift in the air, as if the cavern itself had awakened from a long slumber. "Aidan, get back!" Maria's voice cracked through the static, urgent now, but it was too late. The cocoon split open with a horrific wet sound, and the creature inside uncoiled with terrifying speed. It was enormous, a mass of tendrils and shifting, fluid-like substance, glistening with a sheen that made Aidan's stomach churn. The thing was alive, more than alive. It was intelligent. Before he could react, something cold and unexplainable surged through him. His chest tightened, his heart racing, but not with fear, with something else, something primal. The creature's tendrils reached out toward him, but instead of attacking, they touched him. And in that instant, Aidan felt the strange sensation of being seen, of his very essence being examined and understood. It wasn't just a creature, it was a mind, and that mind was reaching out to him, pulling him into something he didn't understand. "Aidan!" Maria's voice was frantic now. "What's happening?" Aidan didn't answer. He couldn't. The creature was inside his mind, now whispering to him soft, insistent murmurs that he couldn't escape. He felt his body respond, muscles tightening, heart pounding harder. It was as though the creature was drawing out his strength, fueling his very existence. Suddenly, it stopped. The creature recoiled, and Aidan staggered backward, gasping for air, his vision swimming. He reached up to steady himself, but before he could, the last thing he saw was the flash of the creature's eyes, glowing with an ancient predatory intelligence. Then everything went black. Aidan's eyes flickered open to darkness. His breath came in shallow gasps, and a dull ache throbbed at the back of his skull. For a moment, he thought he was still on Mars, still inside that cavern, still connected to that thing. The last thing he remembered was its eyes, those alien, ancient eyes that seemed to see straight through him. His fingers twitched, and he slowly reached up to touch his helmet. It wasn't there. Aidan's hand stilled as the realization hit him. He was on Earth. He wasn't in his spacesuit, but he wasn't in a hospital either. The room around him was sterile, unfamiliar. A bright, harsh light above him burned his eyes, and the faint hum of machines surrounded him. It was a medical bay, but not one he recognized. "Aidan!" A voice cut through the fog in his mind. It was Maria. "Aidan, can you hear me?" He blinked rapidly, trying to focus. His vision cleared, and he saw her standing at the foot of the bed, her expression tense, her body rigid with concern. "What happened?" Aidan croaked, his throat dry. His voice sounded foreign to him, weak. "Where am I?" "You're safe," Maria said, though the look on her face suggested that wasn't entirely true. "You passed out. We brought you back with the rest of the crew after we found you. You were unresponsive for hours. We were getting worried." Aidan tried to sit up, but the moment he moved, a searing pain shot through his chest. His hand went to his rib cage instinctively, feeling a strange, cold sensation beneath his skin. "What's wrong with me?" he asked, his voice a rasp. "What's happening?" Maria hesitated, and the answer hung in the air between them. "We don't know. The symbiote. It's affecting you, Aidan. Something happened when you made contact with it. We think it Bonded with you somehow, but it's not like any symbiosis we've ever studied before. It's like it's inside you. Aidan blinked, trying to process the words. Symbiote. He remembered now the creature, the pulsating cocoon, the overwhelming presence inside his mind, the cold touch of its tendrils. He shuddered, his body responding with a strange, unfamiliar energy. It was like the creature had never left him, even after he'd blacked out. It was still there, buried deep in his mind, thrumming like a heartbeat. "What are you saying?" Aidan's voice cracked as he spoke, a deep unease settling in his stomach. "You're saying it bonded with me?" Maria stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You're not just carrying it, Aidan. It's controlling you." "Controlling me?" Aidan repeated, his voice rising with a mixture of confusion and anger. "I'm fine, Maria. I can't—" Before he could finish his sentence, something inside him shifted, a cold rush of energy that made his vision blur and his pulse quicken. He gasped, feeling a pressure build in his chest, as though something inside him was stirring. It was subtle at first, a faint whispering voice at the back of his mind, but it grew louder, pressing against his thoughts, urging him to listen. "Aidan!" He froze, his blood turning to ice as the voice reverberated in his mind. It wasn't Maria, it wasn't even his own thoughts. "You are mine now." The voice was calm, yet powerful, ancient. It was the symbiote. He recognized it instantly. "Aidan, what's happening?" Maria's voice sounded distant, as if she were far away. "Stay back," Aidan whispered, his voice tight. He felt the blood drain from his face. The cold sensation in his chest was growing stronger, more insistent. He could feel the symbiote inside him, stirring, pressing against his thoughts. The symbiote's presence felt like a shadow, a looming vigor that wanted to consume him. It was already inside him, his body and mind beginning to merge with it. And as much as he tried to fight it, he could feel the bond strengthening. It wasn't a partnership. It wasn't a collaboration. It was a domination. "Who are you?" Aidan demanded, his hands shaking as he struggled to maintain control. "What do you want from me?" "I am the king," the voice answered, calm and unyielding. "I was once the ruler of my people. My civilization was glorious, and now you will bring it back to life." Aidan's mind reeled. "What are you talking about? Bring what back?" "My kind, my kin. I will resurrect them. You will help me do this, Aidan. Together, we will rule the earth." Aidan recoiled at the thought. "No, I won't let you." But the symbiote's will was stronger. "You have no choice. You are mine. You will obey." The last word echoed in his mind like a command, and Aidan felt his body responding against his will. His muscles tensed, his fists clenching at his sides, as if the symbiote was taking over. He gasped, fighting to maintain control, but it was slipping away, little by little. Maria's voice cut through his internal chaos. "Aidan, you're scaring me. What's going on? What's happening to you?" He couldn't answer. He couldn't even speak. Then, the voice in his head changed, growing darker. "They will bow to me," it whispered. "The humans will kneel at my feet, or they will burn." Aidan's breath caught in his throat. The weight of the words, the truth of them, shook him to his core. He had been chosen, and now the symbiote was using him as a vessel for its vengeance. The idea of ruling the world, of bending humanity to its will, filled him with disgust, but also something else, something more dangerous, a thrill, a desire to control, to never be weak again. And as that thought settled into his mind, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't sure he could fight it anymore. Aidan couldn't escape the whispers. No matter how hard he tried to focus, to push them away, they were always there. Like a shadow creeping just beyond the edge of his thoughts, the symbiote's voice was becoming louder, more insistent. He was fighting it, barely, but it was winning. He could feel it in every fiber of his being, this strange power growing within him, reshaping his mind and body in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. It had been 3 days since he woke up in the medical bay, and yet it felt like a lifetime. He hadn't spoken much to Maria or the crew since that moment when the symbiote's voice first seized control. He couldn't bear to look them in the eye. They were scared of him. He could see it in the way they avoided him, in the wary glances they exchanged when they thought he wasn't looking. They didn't understand. How could they? But the symbiote understood. It knew him. It knew everything about him, every fear, every weakness, every longing he'd ever had. It was inside him, burrowing deeper with each passing moment, twisting his thoughts until they were no longer entirely his own. Aidan, the voice rang out in his mind, smoother now, almost affectionate. You are growing stronger. You can feel it, can't you? The power surging through your veins. You can heal, you can destroy. Aidan's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table in front of him. He was sitting in the dimly lit control room of the facility, watching the Earthrise on the screen, a brilliant blue marble suspended against the black void of space. The sight was meant to calm him, to remind him of the greater mission, but instead it made him feel hollow. He knew the symbiote was growing impatient. The pull to give in was becoming almost unbearable. He felt it every time he closed his eyes, every time his pulse quickened. It was always there, this hunger for more. Stop, Aidan muttered, clenching his teeth. I'm not going to let you take over, the voice chuckled, low, smooth. You think you can fight me? You will submit in time. I am the king, and you are the vessel. Together we will resurrect my kin. The world will kneel before us. No, Aidan hissed. I'm not like you. I won't. You will. The voice was firm, unyielding. It is inevitable. Aidan's hands slammed down onto the table, knocking over a stack of papers and sending a few loose tools scattering across the floor. He took a ragged breath, trying to steady himself, but his thoughts were no longer his own. The symbiote's power was infiltrating every corner of his mind, twisting his emotions until they no longer felt like his. He had tasted that power. It was like nothing he had ever known before, pure, raw energy, coursing through him like fire. The strength it gave him made his old body feel weak, like it was made of paper. His senses were sharper, his reflexes faster. He could heal injuries in moments, his body knitting itself back together with a thought. But the other side of that power was darker, more dangerous. He could feel the anger inside him, the bloodlust, the desire to dominate. He wanted to break something. He wanted to make them all bow. He slammed his fist into the table, cracking the metal beneath his knuckles. The sudden surge of pain did little to distract him. In fact, it seemed to fuel the anger building inside him. The symbiote was feeding on his emotions, on his frustration, and it was only making things worse. Aidan, please, Maria's voice called out from the doorway. He didn't hear her approach, but when he looked up, there she was, her expression tight, wary. You're scaring the team. We're worried about you. Aidan stood up quickly, his heart racing. The symbiote stirred inside him, urging him to lash out to show his power. His vision blurred for a moment and he blinked, trying to focus. I'm fine, he snapped, his voice sounding too harsh, too controlled. I just need space. I need to think. Maria's brow furrowed. We're all in this together, Aidan. You don't have to do this alone. She is weak, the symbiote whispered in his mind. She is holding you back. They all are. You are stronger than they will ever understand. Aidan's breath hitched as he fought to stay calm. He couldn't let Maria see what was happening to him. She would never forgive him if she knew the truth, that he was losing himself to something far darker than he could handle. Just leave me alone, Maria, he muttered, his voice tinged with a strange bitterness. He turned away, refusing to meet her eyes. I need time. She hesitated, her hand hovering at the doorframe. I know this is hard, Aidan, but we can figure this out. We'll help you. Please don't shut us out." Aidan didn't respond. He couldn't. The moment she left, he would be alone with the symbiote again, and he knew that would only make things worse. Maria let out a soft sigh, then turned and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Aidan stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. "Why do you resist?" the symbiote purred. "You know the power is yours for the taking. All you need to do is accept it." Aidan squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the overwhelming urge to give in. But as the minutes ticked by, he felt the power coursing through him again, pulsing, steady, relentless. It wasn't just strength, it was control. He could feel it in his fingertips, the raw potential to break anything, anyone. He could feel the world around him bending to his will. His eyes flashed open, and he knew deep down that the symbiote was right. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was something more, something dangerous. As his mind spun with this realization, a voice broke through the chaos in his head. Louder, sharper this time. The symbiote wasn't just trying to sway him, it was making him see it, making him want it. "The world will kneel, or it will burn," it whispered, its words sinking deep into Aidan's soul. He clenched his fists harder, his knuckles popping as his body began to shake. He was teetering on the edge now, one step away from surrendering, one breath away from letting the symbiote take control entirely. But deep inside, Aidan clung to a single thought, a memory of who he used to be, the man who had dedicated his life to exploration, to discovery, the man who had dreamed of making the world a better place. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. The quiet hum of the facility seemed unnaturally loud in the small room where Aidan sat alone. His gaze was fixed on the monitor in front of him, but his mind was far from the data being displayed on the screen. It had been days since he had last spoken to the crew, and the whispers had only grown louder. The symbiote inside him was no longer just a presence, it was a force. It was beginning to feel like he was sharing his body with something else. Every movement, every thought seemed to belong to both of them. He could feel its will pressing against him, urging him to act, to seize what he had once only dreamed of. The promise of power, of ruling, of never being weak again. And yet somewhere deep inside, Aidan fought to hold on. He wasn't sure why anymore. The man he had been, the astronaut with noble ideals, seemed so distant now. His heart was heavy, and every breath felt like a battle against the force inside him that sought to break free. The doors to the control room slid open with a soft hiss, and Aidan didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Maria had been the only one brave enough to approach him lately, still not talking to anyone. Her voice was a mix of concern and frustration. Aidan didn't answer. He couldn't find the words. Every time he opened his mouth, it was like the symbiote was speaking for him, twisting his intentions, distorting his thoughts. "Are you listening to me, Aidan?" Maria asked again, her voice quieter this time. The weight of her gaze pressed against him, but Aidan remained motionless, his fingers hovering just above the controls, lost in the swirling chaos of his mind. Maria's footsteps were tentative as she crossed the room, stopping just behind him. "Aidan, we need to talk. This is bigger than you and me. We need to figure out what's going on. You're not yourself." Aidan's hands twitched, but he didn't move. Instead, the symbiote's voice filled his head, calm and soothing. "You don't need her, Aidan. You don't need anyone. You only need me. Together, we will rise. The world will kneel." He closed his eyes briefly, trying to ignore the words, but it was becoming impossible. "Why won't you speak to me?" Maria pressed, her voice tinged with desperation. "Why? Won't you let us help you?" Aidan turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. He wanted to say something, anything, to assure her that he was still there, that he could control the symbiote. But the moment their gazes met, the symbiote took over. "You don't understand, Maria. You're weak. All of you are. Aidan's voice was not his own. It was laced with something cold, something cruel. You can't stop what's coming. Maria flinched, her breath catching in her throat. She stepped back, her expression a mixture of hurt and fear. Aidan didn't blame her. He could see it in her eyes. She was terrified of him. She had every right to be. The symbiote's voice was loud now, filling every corner of his mind, making it impossible to think clearly. The time has come. You must know the truth. Let me show you. Suddenly, Aidan's body moved of its own accord. His hands shot out, slamming the buttons on the nearby console. The screen flickered for a moment, and then a new image appeared, a series of cryptic symbols that Aidan had seen before, etched into the walls of the cavern on Mars. It was a recording, ancient, alien. The images were blurry at first, but as they focused, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, regal, its form outlined in shimmering golden light. It was a being of immense power, its eyes glowing with the same predatory intelligence Aidan had seen in the symbiote's gaze. "I am Kalen, king of the Joran," the figure spoke, its voice deep and commanding, echoing through the silence. "Of the control room." Aidan's breath caught in his throat as the vision shifted. The figure, Kalen, was surrounded by an entire civilization, a sprawling city of impossible architecture. Towers rose to the sky, their structures sleek and otherworldly. People, no, beings, walked the streets, their bodies radiating with an aura of power and grace. But there was something wrong about them, a strange hunger in their eyes. "We were once the rulers of all," Kalen's voice continued, smooth and confident. "We were immortal, eternal, the masters of life itself. But the universe is cruel. My kingdom fell, brought to ruin by those who feared us. They struck at our hearts, and my people were destroyed." Aidan felt his pulse quicken. The vision shifted again, showing a battle, chaotic, destructive. The Joran civilization crumbled beneath the assault. A single word echoed through the image: betrayal. Now, Kalen's voice resonated again, the image fading into darkness. "Only I remain. My kin are gone, but I will resurrect them. They will rise again, and the world will bow." The recording ended abruptly, and the room fell into silence. The symbiote inside Aidan stirred, its presence pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Do you see now, Aidan?" the voice whispered. "I am not just a parasite. I am a king. And you will be my queen." Aidan's heart raced as the weight of the revelation settled over him. The symbiote wasn't just a creature, it was an ancient king, a ruler who had once controlled an entire civilization. The promise of power wasn't just a temptation, it was a legacy. Aidan could feel it now, in the depths of his soul. The symbiote's thirst for revenge, for restoration. But there was more to it than that. It wasn't just about revenge. The symbiote had the power to bring back its entire species, to resurrect the Joran. A new empire would rise from the ashes of Earth, and Aidan would be its leader. He would rule at the side of this ancient being, a king among kings. The vision, no, the truth, hung in his mind like a weight too heavy to bear. Maria stood behind him, silent now, watching him with a growing understanding in her eyes. "Aidan, you've seen it, haven't you?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Her voice was soft, pleading, as if trying to reach him. "This isn't you. You're not a king. You're a man. You're Aidan Hall. He is mine." The symbiote's voice interrupted, cold and final. "You cannot. Save him." Aidan's body trembled as the force of the symbiote's will overwhelmed him. It was like a tide pulling him under, dragging him deeper into the dark, ancient void of Kalen's memories. And somewhere deep inside, Aidan knew he was losing himself. The world was on the brink of destruction, and he was standing at the precipice, torn between the man he had once been and the power that now consumed him. Aidan's eyes met Maria's for the briefest of moments, and for the first time in days, he saw a flicker of something, hope, in her gaze. But that hope was fleeting, because as the symbiote's voice rang in his ears, Aidan knew one thing for certain: there would be no turning back. The darkness of space stretched out in front of them, infinite and cold. But for Aidan Hall, it wasn't the vast emptiness of the cosmos that dominated his thoughts. It was the fire burning inside him. It was the power that surged through his veins, that twisted his heart, that made his skin hum with untapped potential. He could feel it. The symbiote's hunger for dominion, its thirst for revenge. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his nails digging into the skin of his palms. The power was too much. He could feel it now, pushing at every corner of his mind, urging him to act. It was almost unbearable. And yet, there was a strange, intoxicating pleasure in it. The voice of the symbiote was like a steady drumbeat, constant, persistent, guiding him. Soon, Aidan, soon. He could feel its thoughts bleeding into his own, like ink mixing with water, creating a shadow that he couldn't escape. And in the depths of that shadow, the truth was becoming clear. Humanity was weak. They couldn't understand. They didn't deserve this world. The symbiote had shown him its history, its kingdom, its fall, and now it wanted to rise again. But Aidan couldn't ignore the flicker of doubt that remained. Somewhere beneath the overwhelming power and the pull of the symbiote, the man he had been still existed. The astronaut who had looked up at the stars with wonder, the human who had sacrificed everything to explore the unknown. He had once wanted to help humanity, but now, it felt like there was no turning back. The door to his quarters slid open, breaking him from his thoughts. Maria stood there, her face pale, her eyes full of something Aidan couldn't quite name. Was it fear, concern, or something darker? Aidan, she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. We need to talk. He didn't answer at first. He couldn't. The symbiote's presence was overwhelming, urging him to silence her, to push her away. But a part of him, an old, dying part, still cared about her. So instead of ignoring her, he nodded stiffly and stepped aside. Maria entered cautiously, her eyes never leaving him as she moved into the room. She paused, looking around, as if searching for something. An answer, maybe, or a sign that he was still Aidan. Aidan, I don't know what to say anymore, she began, her voice soft but laced with an edge of determination. You're not the same. You're not you anymore. Aidan stood there, unmoving, his fists clenched at his sides. His heart pounded in his chest, a war raging inside him. Maria, he began, but his voice sounded strange, distant, as though it was being forced through a veil. I'm still the same person. I'm just stronger now. She shook her head slowly. No, this thing inside you, it's not you. I don't know what's happened to you, but I can see it. You're losing yourself to it. This is not you, Aidan. The symbiote stirred inside him, rising like a storm. He could feel its power, its hunger, its desire for control. She does not understand, Aidan. She is weak. She is a hindrance. You need to show her the truth. Aidan closed his eyes briefly, his hands trembling. The pressure in his chest was unbearable. Maria, please. His voice cracked, the man inside him struggling to surface. I don't want to hurt anyone, but you have to understand. The world is broken. We've always been weak. I've always been weak, but I'm not anymore. I can make things better. I can fix everything. Maria stepped closer, her eyes searching his face, trying to find the person she had known. Aidan, no, this is not you. You can't fix the world by destroying it. The words hit him like a slap. The symbiote's voice was louder now, almost deafening. "She is weak, she doesn't understand. You are stronger, you are the king." Aidan's breath quickened, his hands clenching tighter, nails digging into his skin. "Maria, you don't see it, you don't feel it. I can fix this, I can make the world better." Her voice cracked, and for a moment there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. By controlling everyone, by making them submit. Aidan froze, the weight of her words crashing over him. She was right. The symbiote wasn't offering peace, it was offering domination. And yet, the temptation to accept that power was so great. The lure of being able to bend the world to his will, to make everyone listen, to finally stop feeling helpless. It was intoxicating. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing against him as the symbiote's voice swirled. Around his mind, drowning out his thoughts. "You can make them bow, Aidan. You can make them kneel." His eyes snapped open, his gaze cold and sharp. The symbiote had taken control again, its power too great for him to resist. Maria took a step, back, fear written on her face as she saw the change in him. "Aidan, please don't do this." But it was too late. Aidan raised his hand, the air around him crackling with energy. His skin pulsed with unnatural strength, his veins glowing faintly with the symbiote's power. He could feel it coursing through him, making him stronger, faster. He was no longer human. "Not entirely. You don't understand," Aidan said, his voice distant, hollow. "You can't stop this. No one can. The world will kneel, or it will burn." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was resolute. "Aidan, I don't care what's inside you. I care about you. I won't give up on you. I'll fight for you." Aidan flinched as the words cut through the fog in his mind, but the symbiote pushed them away. "She is weak. She is nothing. She will try to stop us." He looked at Maria, his heart torn. He wanted to be that man again, the man who cared, who loved. But the symbiote's grip was tightening, and the power it offered was too great to resist. He stepped forward, his movements predatory, controlled by the will of the symbiote. Maria took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "Aidan, don't," she whispered, but he was already too far gone. With one last desperate cry, she lunged for the control panel beside the door, desperately trying to activate the security system. But before she could reach it, Aidan's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with inhuman speed. The force was enough to make her gasp in pain. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Aidan, please, fight it. You're still in there." For a fleeting moment, Aidan saw the man he used to be, the man who loved her, who fought for her, who would never harm her. But the symbiote's presence was overpowering, and he felt the grip of the king's power tightening around his heart. "I'm sorry, Maria," Aidan whispered, but his voice was barely audible over the roar of the symbiote. "I can't stop this. I won't stop this." With a final surge of strength, Aidan pushed her away, sending her stumbling back toward the door. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to be this monster. But the power, it was too much. The king had taken control, and Aidan Hall, the man who had once dreamed of saving the world, was lost. The air inside the command center of the facility had grown thick with tension. The once bustling room now stood in eerie silence, the hum of machinery the only sound. The crew huddled around a monitor, their faces drawn and pale as they watched the unfolding chaos on Earth. News feeds from every continent were reporting the same thing: the world was on the brink. It had only been a few days since Aidan's transformation, but in that time, the symbiote's influence had spread like wildfire. Cities were in turmoil, governments had crumbled. Unexplained phenomena had begun to plague the planet: storms, earthquakes, and strange energy surges. But most terrifying of all were the reports of people changing. Aidan Hall, once a hero, was now the face of a terrifying new order. His eyes, glowing with an otherworldly power, were broadcasted everywhere. He had come to be known as the King, the one who would unite humanity under his rule. But not through peace or diplomacy. No, Aidan was preaching a vision of absolute power, a vision of control, where everyone would kneel or be destroyed. On the screen in front of them, Aidan's voice echoed from a broadcast he had delivered mere hours ago. "The time has come for us to rise. You will bow before me or you will burn. The world will be mine. The world will be ours." It was chilling to hear, but what was even more unsettling was the truth behind it. The symbiote, Kalen, had begun awakening more of its kin, and there were reports of others being taken over, transformed into the same unstoppable force. The symbiote's power was multiplying, and soon Aidan would have an army. Soon the world would bend to his will. Maria stood at the front of the room, her hands shaking as she watched the broadcast. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She needed to see what had become of the man she once knew. But every time she saw his eyes, the cold, glowing pupils that no longer reflected anything human, her heart shattered all over again. "Aidan, no," she whispered, her voice breaking. The others in the room remained silent, unsure how to respond. Some of them were trying to make sense of the strange reports coming in. Others were already strategizing how to contain the spread of the symbiote's influence, but no one spoke of a solution. No one had any answers. "We've lost him," Sergeant Wyatt said from the corner of the room, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The man we knew is gone. This is something else." Maria didn't answer. She couldn't. Every time she thought of Aidan, her mind returned to the moment she had last seen him, the coldness in his eyes, the power emanating from him. It wasn't just physical strength. It was a force that threatened to bend the very fabric of reality. Aidan had become something unimaginable, something monstrous. "It's not too late," Lieutenant Ramirez said, her voice quiet but determined. "We can still stop him." Maria turned toward her, eyes red from lack of sleep. "How? He's not the man we knew anymore. He's a god now." Ramirez shook her head. "No, he's still Aidan. Somewhere in there, he's still the man we fought with. We can get through to him. We just have to reach him." Maria's gaze dropped to the floor. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to hold on to the hope that Aidan was still in there, buried beneath the weight of the symbiote's control. But deep down, she knew the truth. The man she loved was lost, and the world was falling with him. Elsewhere, across the globe, the change was beginning. In a city that had once been a symbol of hope, now nothing more than a smoldering ruin, a group of survivors huddled together, trying to avoid the terrifying soldiers who now ruled the streets. These were not ordinary men and women. They were once human, but now they were something else. Their eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. Their movements were sharp, deliberate, and their presence was suffocating. They were the first of many transformed by the symbiote's power. One of the survivors, a man named Elias, turned to his group, his face etched with fear. "We need to get out of here. They're coming." A woman next to him, her face gaunt with exhaustion, nodded. "We can't outrun them. They're everywhere. We'll be lucky if we make it through the night." Elias looked out at the horizon. The city was a war zone. Fires burned in the distance, and strange glowing pillars of energy were rising from the ground, transforming the cityscape into something unrecognizable. It was as if reality itself was warping under the influence of the symbiote's power. "They're hunting us," Elias said, his voice low and filled with dread. "We're not safe anywhere." The woman, whose name was Olivia, shuddered. "But we can't just let them take over. We have to fight back." Elias's eyes softened. "How? How do you fight a god?" The survivors fell silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. In the distance, they could see the first of the transformed. people, once their friends and neighbors, now turned into unfeeling, unstoppable agents of the symbiote. They walked, with purpose, their glowing eyes scanning the street for any sign of rebellion. Elias turned back to the group. "We need to find shelter. If we can survive the night, we might have a chance." But as they gathered their belongings and prepared to move, there was a rumble in the distance, louder this time, closer. The ground trembled, and the sky above seemed to crack open, a surge of energy pulsing through the atmosphere. In the center of the chaos, a dark silhouette appeared, and within seconds it was unmistakable: the King Aidan. Standing at the top of a building, he looked down on the destruction around him, the ruins of humanity's once proud cities beneath his feet. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, and his voice, amplified through some kind of device, echoed across the city. "You have failed. You will all kneel before me. All of you." His words sent a shiver through the survivors. They had no choice now. They were being hunted, and their only hope was to run. But as Elias and the others scrambled to flee, the sky cracked again, and this time a sharp, metallic sound rang out across the city. The Joran had arrived. More symbiotes, creatures like the one inside Aidan, now moved freely among the people, their presence felt everywhere. They were the harbingers of a new world, a world that would no longer be governed by humanity, but by those who wielded the power to control life itself. Back at the facility, Maria sat alone, her fingers pressed against her temples as she tried to block out the vision of what was happening outside. Her mind was racing, filled with dread. Every passing moment brought her closer to the terrifying truth. Humanity's last hope lay with Aidan, and yet he had chosen to become something far worse. But there had to be something she could do. Something. Deep breath. Then a spark of clarity. She could see it now. The weakness. The symbiote was powerful, yes, but it was still inside Aidan. That was his humanity. That was their chance. The air was thick with tension, the sky above torn, as if the heavens themselves were witnessing the breaking of a world. On the rooftop of a crumbling building, Aidan Hall, now the king, stood tall, his eyes glowing like twin beacons of power. Below, the remnants of humanity, scattered and broken, looked up at him. To them, he was both savior and tyrant, god and monster. The symbiote Kalen pulsed within him, urging him to rise higher, to take control of everything. Aidan could feel it in every fiber of his being, an insatiable hunger, a thirst for dominance. His heart, once a symbol of hope, now felt cold and distant. The man who had wanted to heal the world, to save it, was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Yet, in the midst of all this, a flicker of doubt remained. A small, fragile part of Aidan still fought to reclaim the man he had been. Aidan, Maria's voice echoed in his mind. He had heard it before, on the edge of sleep in the midst of his most violent dreams. Her voice, filled with sorrow and hope, was a distant memory. "Please, come back to me. You can still fight this. You can still be the man I knew." But the symbiote's voice was louder, more insistent. "You are the king now. You are beyond her, beyond them. You are power. You are everything. They are nothing." The world around him seemed to tremble under the weight of his decision. The city below lay in ruins, its once proud buildings now smoldering husks. People were afraid of him, of what he had become, and yet they still believed, they still hoped. For what, though? For a savior who no longer existed. Aidan clenched his fists. He could feel the symbiote's power flooding through him, could feel its unrelenting urge to crush everything beneath him. "Bow, Aidan," it whispered. "You will rule. You will take what is rightfully yours. The world will kneel or it will burn." Suddenly, a voice broke through the fog of his mind, sharp and clear. "Aidan." It was Maria. She stood before him, now her expression determined but filled with pain. She was no longer the woman who had pleaded with him to resist. She was the woman who had come to face him, to make him see what he was about to destroy. Aidan, please, look at what you're doing. Look at what you've become. He turned to face her, his heart aching with a mixture of guilt and anger. The symbiote hissed, a low growl deep in his chest, but he ignored it for the moment. Maria stood firm, despite the fear in her eyes, despite the fact that she had no idea what kind of power she was standing against. "You don't understand," Aidan said, his voice hollow, devoid of the warmth it once held. "I'm saving the world. I'm giving it. Order power. It's the only way, you'll see." Maria took a step forward. "No, Aidan, this isn't you. This is the symbiote. You don't have to do this. You don't have to destroy everything just to prove you're stronger." Aidan's heart fluttered in his chest, a small, painful ache that cut through the coldness of the symbiote's grip. She doesn't understand. She's weak. But Aidan fought back the symbiote's influence, reaching deep within himself to the memory of who he had been. The astronaut, the man who had stood with her, looked at the stars with wonder, and dreamed of a future where they could make the world better. "I can make it better," he whispered, almost to himself. Maria's voice broke through again, soft but full of desperate hope. "Aidan, I know you can, but not like this. Not through destruction. You were never meant to rule with power like this." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time since the transformation, Aidan felt the weight of her gaze, the depth of her love. It wasn't about domination. It was about hope. It was about saving people, not breaking them. "It's too late, Aidan. You are ours now," the symbiote growled, its voice deafening. But the words no longer had the same pull. Aidan's hands, once clenched in fury, began to relax. He felt the presence of the symbiote, the power that had once been so intoxicating. But now it felt empty, hollow. The sky above seemed to shift, as if the world was holding its breath. Aidan's glowing eyes dimmed, the light within them flickering. The symbiote howled inside him, desperate to keep its hold, but Aidan's resolve was growing stronger. Maria took another step forward. She reached out, her hand trembling, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Aidan reached back. Their hands touched, and something inside Aidan stirred, a feeling he hadn't felt in so long, love. The symbiote screamed in fury. "No, you cannot fight us! You are the king, you are power!" But Aidan was no longer listening. He focused on Maria's eyes, on the warmth of her hand, on the memory of who he had once been. Slowly, the grip of the symbiote began to loosen. He felt it, like 1,000 chains being broken, the power slipping away, its voice fading into the background. With a final tortured cry, Aidan broke free. The glowing in his eyes faded completely, leaving only the man he had been standing there, broken but still human. For a moment, silence reigned. The world was still. The destruction, the chaos, it had all led up to this single choice. Aidan's breath came in ragged gasps as he fell to his knees, exhausted, the weight of the symbiote finally gone. Maria knelt beside him, her hand still in his. "You're back," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're still in there." Aidan's eyes met hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled, a weak but real smile. "I'm sorry, Maria. I'm so sorry." And with that, the war was over. The symbiote had been defeated, but the damage it had caused, both to Aidan and to the world, would take years to heal. But for the first time in a long while, there was hope. A new dawn was breaking.